Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed scholars and devotees of imperial history, today we gather to delve into one of the most pivotal and enigmatic chapters in the history of the Imperium, the War in the Webway and the day the Emperor himself took the field. Picture the golden age of the Imperium, a time of great conquest and ambition under the guidance of the Emperor. Yet lurking beneath this gilded veneer was a struggle, hidden from the eyes of the ordinary citizen, a war fought in the shadows and the esoteric corridors of the Webway, an ancient network of interdimensional paths threading through the warp, held the key to mankind's dominion over the stars, a secret the Emperor guarded zealously. Our tale begins within the Imperial Palace, beneath which lay the Emperor's grand project, a human-gated webway, an audacious attempt to liberate humanity from the capricious tides of the warp and the predatory gaze of its denizens. However, this grand vision was not to be unchallenged. The forces of chaos, ever envious and fearful of mankind's ascendancy, infiltrated this sanctum through a breach, a catastrophic fault caused by Magnus the Red's fateful warning, a psychic message sent in desperation that tore the fabric of reality. The breach unleashed horrors into the Imperial Webway, a relentless onslaught that threatened to spill into terror. In response, the Emperor mobilized his custodian guard, the Sisters of Silence, and legions of Mechanicum warriors to hold back this infernal tide. For days uncounted, they fought in the labyrinthine expanse of the Webway, a battle unseen but no less crucial than those fought on distant worlds. Then came the day when the Emperor himself took to the battlefield in all his resplendent might, descending into the Webway. Let me tell you the tale of this day, from the records of the Inquisition to the engramic tombs of the Mechanicum. We have searched the records and come upon this wondrous tale. Enjoy and listen closely. The sun finally ascended in a realm devoid of sunlight, where shadows had reigned supreme. It illuminated the gathered custodians, Sisters of Silence and soldiers of the Imperium and Mechanicus. Its arrival was more than a mere illumination. It was a tangible force, a presence that seared both his armor and his skin. The enemy hordes, in their otherworldly nature, felt this dawn as a corrosive acid on their flesh, a torment that unraveled what little semblance of order they had ever possessed. Whispers of despair echoed through those present minds, an anguished cacophony scraping at the fringes of his consciousness. The anathema. They cried out in frantic agony. The anathema approaches, the sun rises. They bore the features of a man born in the untamed realms of ancient Eurasia. His skin bore the rich hues of Terran heritage, a blend of bronzed and burnt umber tones. His eyes were even darker, and his flowing mane of long black hair was bound by a simple circlet crown adorned with metal leaves, a practical choice to keep it away from his face during combat, rather than a symbol of regal grandeur. He moved with the grace of a mortal, weaving his way through the tightly packed ranks of his guardians on foot, occasionally pushing through the masses when they failed to make way for him instinctively. Like his guardians, he was adorned in resplendent gold. The same sigils of Terran unity and imperial nobility that adorned their armor were prominently displayed on his attire. Unlike the crude industrial clamor of the mass-manufactured legionary plate, his armor joints emitted a melodious purr, resonating with the echoes of older, more refined technologies. Suspended by a simple strap against his flowing red cloak, a black and bronze ornate bolter rested on his back. In his hand, he carried a sword, one that bore little resemblance to the blades depicted in victory murals or illustrated sagas. While it might have been unquestionably beautiful in the eyes of Terran lords and kings, in the grasp of the ruler of an entire species, it appeared rather plain. It was a weapon meant to be wielded, a tool for the shedding of blood, devoid of any ornamentation for admiration. Its blade was adorned with impossibly intricate circuitry, intertwining in shades of black and copper against a silver so sacred that it seemed almost imbued with a divine, bluish hue. In prior conflicts waged on distant planets, the Emperor had often greeted his custodians with subtle telepathy, softly speaking their names as he passed them before the impending battle. Yet in this dire engagement, he displayed greater restraint, moving to the embattled front ranks without bestowing any form of acknowledgement. Among the Neverborn, the otherworldly denizens of chaos, a variety of reactions ensued. Some amongst their ranks broke formation and fled, cowardly fragments of their vile masters who recognized the arrival of annihilation. Others resorted to tearing into one another, cannibalizing their kindred in a desperate bid to bolster their strength in the face of impending obliteration. Yet another faction among them lost their tenuous grasp on corporeal existence, their forms liquefying and dissolving even before the sword-wielding monarch reached the battlefront. The most formidable of the Neverborn seethed with an insatiable fury, railing against the sin of the Emperor's existence. With a collective bellow that reverberated through the still air of this alternate reality, they surged forward in an attempt to reach their arch-enemy. At the Emperor's side, a custodian, Ra, stood poised with his spear, its whirling motion punctuating the air as it pierced through the amorphous bodies of the writhing blue creatures that emitted mournful wails from their numerous mouths. Inside his helm, sweat drenched his face, while the blood coursing through his muscles weighed upon him like molten lead. Turning to his sovereign, Ra inquired, "Orders, sire?" In response, the Emperor raised his sword, gripping it with both hands. As his knuckles tightened around the hilt, intricate circuitry traced along the blade's length, sparking with electrical fire and enshrouding the weapon in flames. There was no need for spoken words, nor did the Emperor cast a glance toward any of his warriors. Instead, the sword descended, and the webway ignited in a blazing conflagration. Within the blazing inferno, indistinct forms and shadowy specters waged a relentless struggle, their fiery figures ever-changing. Among them were fire-born avatars, the embodiments of fallen warriors from the 10,000, immersed in a maelstrom of psychic flames and thrusting lances forged from fire itself. The silhouettes of space marines, the betrayed and deceased of Istvan, brandished an array of axes, blades, and claws, their legion's sigils partially obscured by the ashen residue clinging to their scorched armor. Among these formidable figures stood a colossal giant, its immense hands poised and ready, surging forward at the forefront of the fiery onslaught, a fleeting resurgence of the 10th son of a crumbling empire, momentarily reborn in his father's consuming wrath. In the seething conflagration, demons met their doom by the thousands, their ethereal forms incinerated, leaving only scorched remnants of their false skeletal structures. A corrosive, purifying radiance emanated from the Emperor's sword, enveloping it in white flames that pulsed with every strike. To gaze upon him was to risk blindness, while standing before him meant certain death. With a resounding roar, the custodians followed their sovereign, relentlessly cleaving through the ranks of the Neverborn. Their thrusting spears and resounding bolt guns banished the demons with each relentless assault. Blades sliced through the otherworldly flesh, showering the battlefield in acidic, corrosive blood. No longer obscured by mist, the field was now shrouded in ash from the incinerated departed. Silver spears gleamed in the dust-choked air as the 10,000 embarked on their last charge. Following closely behind the golden-clad warriors were their loyal attendants, carrying fresh ammunition and armor sealant. These retainers were formidable fighters in their own right, shielded from harm by the swirling blades of their masters. Regardless of the toll these clandestine years of warfare had exacted on the Legio Custodes, they now stood as mere echoes of their former selves. Regardless of the fact that they had fought, bled and perished over the past half-decade in this lightless and pitiless realm, inhabited solely by the deceased and the accursed, their sovereign had arrived. With the rise of the sun, they charged forth with a battle cry that eclipsed the pitiful wails of the demons meeting their demise upon their blades. The few monstrous beings that survived the Emperor's relentless onslaught staggered and stumbled toward the custodians. They raised fragile blades in deteriorating hands, their blinded, bleeding eyes staring aimlessly. One wretched creature, still bearing the plague that had ended its existence, lunged at Ra. His thrusting spear punctured its eye and shattered its malformed skull. Hissing and bubbling blood cascaded across Ra's gauntlets, evaporating in the Emperor's radiant presence. With a sense of the weapon's depletion, before the warning sigil could flash on his visor, Ra hurled his last explosive bolts and shouted, "Reload!" The armor thralls hastened to retrieve the weapon as he swiftly drew his meridian swords, slashing through diseased flesh and spilling putrid organs onto the misty ground. The sword's energy fields discharged kinetic fury upon every impact. A white rune chimed on his retinal display, and he sheathed the twin sabers in one fluid motion, catching his guardian spear as the ammunition thrall returned it to him. The instant his hand gripped its haft, he resumed his deadly assault. This was the way of his kind. For those fighting, time became an abstract notion, with nothing but the rhythmic pulse of their heart and the burning ache in their muscles. Their senses were attuned solely to the blades and claws that assailed his visage. The ash of vanquished Neverborn coated their armor. "Reload," voices echoed from behind, accompanied by the activated Meridian sword's snap-crack and the armor thrall's muffled affirmations as they retrieved the guardian spear thrust into the ground. As Ra parried a blow from a hefty brass blade, he retaliated with a laser blast that obliterated the creature's face, sending demonic filth from the shattered skull cascading onto the Emperor's back, where it turned to ash before touching the monarch's regal armor. The 10,000 and their gilded sovereign found themselves ankle-deep in ash, as spectral remnants of demonic entities floundered and faded, consumed by the inferno of the Emperor's wrath. Those demons that managed to reach the Emperor met the most gruesome fate. The mightiest and most ferocious among their kind swung their weapons at a foe who no longer occupied his previous location, their blows cleaving through the swirling golden mist that now enveloped him. With thunderous bursts of psychic force, the Emperor would reappear behind these monstrous adversaries, his blazing sword already plunged into their spines. Fire erupted within their very beings, causing them to boil and burst from the inside out. Their searing, sanguineous remnants soaked the custodians closest to their divine sovereign. Exaltation coursed through Ra's veins, a panacea for the fatigue that had previously weighed him down. Although he was profoundly weary, such weariness now held little consequence. Each heartbeat pulsated with vengeance and vindication. "We're prevailing." Ra could sense it in the renewed spirit and fervor transmitted across the Vox as the 10,000 continued their advance. They were not merely holding their ground. Whatever miraculous intervention had allowed the Emperor to stand with them in this climactic moment had succeeded. Nothing could withstand their relentless onslaught. The Emperor turned toward Ra and hurled his sword like a spear. It streaked over Ra's shoulder and impaled itself deeply into the skull of a creature Ra barely had time to register before it disintegrated into burning sludge. In a burst of sunlit mist, the blade returned to the Emperor's grasp, spinning, descending, and claiming more lives. And still, the Emperor pressed forward. A reptilian canine leapt at him, only to pass through the space where he had stood a moment earlier. It gurgled molten blood as the Emperor's sword materialized within its throat. The warlord retained his hold for a brief moment longer before withdrawing the weapon and continuing his advance. The enemy persisted, an unrelenting tide. They looked back to the Wraithbone Gateway, an incongruous sight amid the Mechanicum's machinery. He observed robed unifiers passing through the azure mist, escorted by the last surviving Silent Sisters. The custodian vaulted over the collapsed form of the vulture-like creature, its life extinguished by his last 6 bolts. Mid-air, he discarded his spear behind the front lines and drew his meridian swords, landing gracefully by the Emperor's side, their backs forming an impervious defense. Together, their blades weaved a web of silver light, dismembering anything daring to approach their formidable barrier. "Be ready," the Emperor spoke telepathically. "For what, sire?" Ra inquired. A white sigil flashed on Ra's retinal display as he caught the returned weapon, spinning it with the force of a rotor blade. The tunnel surrounding them groaned under the stress of overburdened generators. "There, Ra, it draws near," the Emperor indicated as he continued his relentless assault, leading his guardians into the depths of a mythic inferno, much like legendary paladins following their sovereign. A rare emotion tinged the Emperor's silent words. "I sense such purity of being, such pure, unadulterated malice." Ra deftly evaded a swinging axe blade and countered with a spear thrust that punctured the creature's scaled throat. Casting a brief glance to his left, he observed Diocletian, his kinsman, extracting his own spear from the innards of a grotesque, pot-bellied, horned monstrosity, impaling a revolting mass of decaying entrails. Flies buzzed around the macabre tableau, agitated by the loss of their putrid refuge. Even beings of immortality could succumb to fatigue. Ra's breath rasped within his closed helmet, and sweat traced fiery lines down his face. His retinal display continuously adjusted to the blazing conflagration erupting with each stroke of the Emperor's blade. "I see only the Horde, sire," Ra reported, noting the entranced fascination in his lord's voice with unease. "Reveal thyself," the Emperor commanded, raising his blade and sweeping it in a fiery crescent. A deluge of flames surged forth in a devastating arc, engulfing the ranks of the Neverborn. The ashes of the dead Daemon host billowed back in the windless atmosphere, shrouding the nearest custodians in the dust of vanquished fiends. Amidst the ashen haze, a figure emerged. A man. A solitary individual with long hair, dark skin, tribal facial hair, adorned in bone jewelry and wielding a spear fashioned from flint lashed to fire-hardened wood. He bore the scars of innumerable spear thrusts and sword slashes etched into his flesh. A man, just a man, with long hair cascading down his back, his dark skin contrasting starkly against the ashen backdrop of this nightmarish battlefield. His tribal beard framed a face marked by scars and the toils of countless battles. Bone jewelry adorned his form, and he brandished a spear crafted from flint, its haft intertwined with vines that had been hardened by fire. His body bore the wounds of his brutal encounters, a testament to the suffering he had inflicted upon others. Hundreds of spear slashes and sword cuts crisscrossed his flesh, with the freshest and bloodiest of them staining his chest, a grim reminder of Jaya's final blow. This lone man, seemingly ordinary, now led the raging hordes of madness behind him. The echo of the first murder. The Emperor's words resonated within Ra's mind, their weight almost suffocating. "The anathema," came the reply, sick and slick, from the enigmatic figure. Predators always revealed themselves in the moments before they struck. Wolves howled as they pursued their prey, sharks cut through the ocean's surface as they hunted. Here, amidst the chaotic ranks of the Neverborn, this shadowy silhouette moved with eerie, too human grace. Whatever its true nature, it mimicked the form of humanity's ancient Stone Epoch war chiefs, an unsettling mockery. For the first time, Ra glimpsed a flicker of doubt in his master's eyes, a sensation that filled him with the unfamiliar and chilling embrace of dread. "Sire," Ra whispered urgently, "we should—" But the Emperor had already acted. Monarch and demon surged toward each other, their movements transcending the boundaries of reality, leaving their lesser followers behind on both sides of the conflict. And in a cataclysmic collision, the two entities, the salvation and damnation of a species, met blade to blade. Blood erupted into the ashen mist, and the Emperor's body contorted in unfamiliar agony. 5 colossal talons, each resembling a spear in size and shape, protruded menacingly from the emperor's back, their malevolent hue dripping crimson. It was said that every person, whether man, woman, or child, perceived the emperor differently. His face, his skin tone, his temperament, all subject to individual interpretation. The 10,000, however, dismissed such notions as the ramblings of unprepared minds, grappling with the presence of a true immortal. To Ra, the emperor was a man like any other. The custodians saw only their master. In that fateful moment, as the emperor's lifeblood adorned the cruel claws, Ra glimpsed what the rest of humanity beheld. He saw the boy destined for kingship, an aged figure shrouded and frail, life seeping from cracked lips. He saw a knight in his prime, adorned with a laurel wreath. He saw a barbarian warlord, fierce and formidable, grinning with blood-stained teeth. These were not mere images, they were identities. Men who once were, men he might have been, and men who never drew breath. The emperor's boots lifted from the misty ground, and he hung impaled by the 5 spear-like talons, his mighty sword slipping from his gloved grasp and vanishing into the shrouded fog. "To the emperor!" Ra's commanding cry echoed, almost blurring his retinal display for an instant. "To the emperor's side!" Ra charged forward, his murderous frenzy fueled by a potent cocktail of unwavering loyalty, seething hatred, and the malevolent touch of an indescribable presence that tainted his senses with a foul taste. Not fear, certainly not fear. "I am the end of empires," the thought echoed, originating not from Ra's mind, but from the shadowy figure amidst the ashes, the emperor's assassin, twisting the thoughts of those present. A brutal intrusion, as if cruel fingers were forcibly unraveling Ra's innermost musings and shaping them into the demon's words. "Kill it!" Ra's voice rang out, a blend of expletive and command. The human-like silhouette, still gripping the impaled emperor above the ground, turned amid the settling ash. The warlord clung desperately to the arm that had impaled him, his telepathic voice bearing a raw edge. "Stay back, all of you. Stay back," the creature cautioned, its chilling promise hanging heavily in the air. "I am your death." "Perhaps one day, but not this day," the emperor responded, his radiance intensifying to the point of blinding brilliance. In an instant, he materialized by Ra's side, kneeling and clutching his chest, his once flowing hair now concealing his features. Human blood, despite the legends, trickled from the emperor's breached armor. "Ra," he conveyed telepathically, thick with defiant pain. Then, aloud, he repeated, "Ra," meeting the horrified gaze of his loyal custodian. A blade pierced the emperor's form, a sinister sword, a fusion of sorcerous bone and metal bearing grotesque, screaming visages, soul carved into its steel. The faces wailed as they devoured the emperor's divine essence. It writhed in his grasp, its shape-shifting and fading. With a cry, the emperor forcibly withdrew the weapon from his own body. He cast it aside with a surge of armored strength and formidable telekinesis, flinging it away in a devastating display of power. Ra's chest reverberated with a resounding impact, a thunderous shockwave that left him gasping for breath, unable to draw air into his lungs. Blood cascaded from his mouth, obstructing his airway. A blade piercing his form, a demon's malevolent embrace, a virulent malady gnawing at his very bones. It was a presence and an absence, an embodiment of all and nothing. Kneeling, Ra's hands closed around the blade that had impaled him. Agonizing nerve pain surged through his trembling fingers as the thwarted demon's wrath coursed through him. Desperation drove him to ask his king, why? Once again, standing tall, the emperor gazed down upon him with icy indifference. At that moment, Ra comprehended. The emperor's words, spoken what felt like ages ago, illuminated his fading consciousness, saturating his thoughts with crimson understanding. "To illuminate you," The Emperor had declared, as they beheld the galaxy's triumphs and transgressions, "You will fight harder once you understand what you are fighting for." Now he knew. Ra Endymion, the solitary soul, granted complete insight into his master's grand visions and aspirations, enlightenment not bestowed for warfare, but to comprehend the very essence of his mission, even if it meant suffering and dissolution. Struggling to his feet on unsteady limbs, Ra leaned upon his spear for support. The sword had vanished, the daemon now confined within him, encaged by his flesh, ensnared by his agony-ridden resolve. He could sense its tendrils encircling his bones, wrenching at them, writhing in relentless pursuit of the master of mankind. It would never relent, never perish. Destruction was impossible, only imprisonment. Avoiding his sire's gaze, the custodian refrained from seeking explanations or apologies. He was bred to serve, nurtured to obey, and chosen for a profound enlightenment preceding a grim duty. Inside him raged a beast even the Emperor could not vanquish, a demon destined to bring an end to the Empire. Each step he took, distancing this malevolent entity from his master, signified another day of unbroken unity for the Imperium. The Emperor, still bleeding and clutching his wounded chest, spoke with strained resolve, his words laced with determination. "When all that remains is ash and dust, be ready." The sword ascended once more, then descended with a blazing surge of fire, incinerating all in its path and clearing the way. Even the Neverborn, clawing their way over the ashen remnants of their kin, tasted the same destruction. The Emperor issued one final command to Ra alone, a silent directive that went unheard by any other. Ra Endymion, the golden jailer of Drachnion, born of water thieves, heeded the last command he would ever receive. He ran. As I conclude this tale, let us reflect on this monumental event's profound implications and aftermath. But even the Emperor's might had its limits. The breach Magnus had inadvertently created was not merely a physical rupture, but a wound in the fabric of reality, a gate that spewed forth endless tides of corruption. With all his foresight and power, the Emperor realized the grim truth. The dream of a safe, human-controlled webway was slipping away through clenched fingers. The decision to retreat, to seal the breach, was as tactical as it was heartbreaking. The forces of the Imperium fought a grueling rearguard action, ensuring their liege's safe passage back to the surface of Terra. Knowing the cost of this retreat, the Emperor sealed the gateway to the webway, trapping the remaining demonic forces within and cutting off the path to what could have been humanity's greatest triumph. This retreat marked a tactical withdrawal and the symbolic end of the Emperor's grand dream. The Webway project, once the beacon of mankind's future, lay in ruins. In retrospect, it was a moment when the light of the Emperor shone brightest against the darkness, a moment that epitomized his sacrifice for humanity. Yet, it was also a moment that foreshadowed the grim reality of the Imperium's future, a future where the Emperor would be confined to the Golden Throne, eternally vigilant against the tides of chaos. His dream of a psychic human race navigating the stars through the webway, forever lost.